So we've completed exercise 3, and now we're going to start talking about graphing. And graphing is going to be one of our most favorite ways to think about functions because there's so much information that's made clear. So many things are easier to figure out when we have a graph. Now, a graph consists of points that we plot. Each point is represented by an ordered pair of numbers, right? Those are two numbers in parentheses. Usually we think of it as an x value first, a y value second. As far as functions are concerned, that's like an input value followed by the corresponding output value. So let's go ahead and look at the next exercise, exercise 4, where we just want to make sure we can make the connection between a graph and a table of values of input and output values for the graph. So here's a graph of a function pictured, and we just want to fill in the table. So when x is equal to -2, here's the x-axis, so x is equal to -2. The point on the graph corresponding to -2 is right there, and it has two coordinates, x-coordinate -2. Its y-coordinate I can see by going sideways, right, to 1, -2, 1 is a point on that graph, and in my table of values I can fill in a 1 for y. When x is -1, the point on the graph when x is -1 is right here, and its coordinates are -1, comma 1 again for y. We have another point with y-coordinate 1, so -1, 1. At 0, when x is 0, we're right on the y-axis, so we're right here at 0. That's 2 units up for y, so 0, 2. That's our y-intercept. When x is 1, we're all the way up here, I think. This is the point 1, 5. So 5 is the corresponding y value. And when x is 2, we're right here on the graph. This is the point 2, 3. So the corresponding y value is 3. So x is our input values, y is our corresponding output values on the graph. We're next going to talk about something called the vertical line test. The vertical line test is a powerful tool for determining for deciding whether a graph is the graph of a function or not. So not every graph is the graph of a function. A graph represents a function only if any x value corresponds to at most one y value. That is, there cannot be 2 points on the graph that have the same x-coordinate. And there's an easy way to visualize this. It's called the vertical line test. Any vertical line can intersect the graph of a function at no more than 1 point. And we looked at some graphs on the first day of class, or actually in the first few videos on our symmetry videos. And let's just go back to these and talk about them a little bit more, those funny graphs we saw at the very beginning. The first one was x squared equals y cubed plus 1. So notice that for each x value, if I go up to the graph, there's precisely 1 point that corresponds to that x value. Here, here, here. And again, I can pick any x value at all, even points that we didn't plot the other day. There's just one y value that corresponds to that x value. There's one y value that corresponds to each x. And as far as the vertical line test is concerned, the way we can think of this is if we draw any vertical line through this graph, it's going to cross the graph at most once. So this vertical line crosses here, this vertical line crosses here. There's no way to draw a vertical line that crosses the graph at more than 1 point. So let's just make a couple observations here. So each x value corresponds to only one y value. vertical lines cross the graph at most one time. And so this is a function. This is the graph of a function. Our first example. Just from the graph, we can determine that, even without looking at the formula. The second example we looked at, that little loop-de-loop, remember that here, well, I can see, it's not too hard to see that. I can draw a vertical line through that graph, and I'm crossing at more than one point. In fact, this was 1 square root of 2 when we plotted the previously. This was 1 negative square root of 2, and there are different locations where I can draw vertical lines and cross at more than one point. So here we can say that we can find a vertical line that crosses the graph more than once. Could be 3 times or more sometimes, but here we just see crossing twice. There are x values that correspond to more than one y value. If you go back to our first page of the handout, this would be like 2 arrows emanating from 1. There's an arrow from 1 to square root of 2. There's also an arrow from 1 to negative square root of 2, where 1 is an input value and the positive and negative square root of 2 are output values. And here we have a much easier visual. We just have to find the vertical line, a vertical line that crosses more than one point. So this is not the graph of a function. Our second example. And then our third example I'm not going to bring out, but that if you go back to the third example we looked at in the symmetry videos, that also was the graph of a function. All right, so now let's go ahead and apply this vertical line test in an exercise, and we're going to find out this works really, really nicely. So in part A, we just look at this graph and say, can we find a vertical line that crosses that graph more than once? And actually, I can't. I can only cross it once with a vertical line. So we would say, yes, this is the graph of a function. So this guy is a function. In B, it's not too hard to see that we can draw. I can draw a vertical line that's going to cross that graph 3 times. Not a function, not the graph of a function. No way. In part C, kind of a funny looking shape, but if you imagine vertical lines in that picture, I'm only going to cross once. So this is another yes, is a function. In D, that's a circle. Now, I think you can see with a circle, I can draw a vertical line that crosses that graph more than once. That's not a function. A circle can never be the graph of a function because you're always going to have a vertical line that can cross that circle at more than one point. And then E is this sort of funny looking, it's just a horizontal line graph. And But if I draw vertical lines through this picture, they're only going to cross that horizontal line once. So that, yes, that is a function. So the vertical line test, again, is a great tool to look at a graph and decide whether the graph is a function or not. Now we have one more part to this, so we'll finish up this handout in the next video.